Ladies and gentlemen, let us continue today's event with the second keynote. This time the topic is e-Conomy SEA by Mr. Rohit Sipahimalani, the Joint Head Investment Group Temasek. Therefore, I would like to invite Mr. Sipahimalani to the stage. Please give a big round of applause for Mr. Sipahimalani.
So, Your Excellency Parudyantra, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to share with you today some highlights from the Google Temasek 4th edition of our Southeast Asia Internet Economy report, which we released last week. But before I do that, I must congratulate and I must thank East Ventures because they have been critical in developing the internet economy in Southeast Asia to what it is today. So thank you, East Ventures, and thank you for inviting me here today to speak to this audience, which really is the future of the Southeast Asia internet economy. So the mobile internet is truly transforming Southeast Asia today, and Indonesia is at the forefront of it. There are 360 million internet users in Southeast Asia today. That is up 100 million from what we had just 4 years ago. And more importantly, these users are very active on the mobile. Engagement on the mobile phone for users in Southeast Asia is amongst the highest in the world, at over 4 hours a day. In fact, 4 of Southeast Asia economies, and Indonesia is one of them, rank amongst the top 10 economies in the world in terms of user engagement on the mobile phone. And that is what has allowed the internet economy today to grow to $100 billion in 2019 in Southeast Asia. That is up 3x from what it was 4 years ago. Now I know Parudi was telling us that we are underestimating this number. We're not counting a lot of things. So what this really includes in this 100 billion is e-commerce, ride-hailing, which includes food delivery, online media, and travel. There are clearly other parts, including financial services, which we'll talk about later, which are not included in this number. But within the economy, the way we've described it in terms of transaction value, we see this growing to 300 billion by 2025. And by the way, this number we had projected at 200 billion in 2016. Last year, we upped the projection to 240 billion, and now we've upped it to 300 billion. So I admit we have been conservative, but really everything has surpassed our expectations. So there are two types of economies in Southeast Asia. Those that are growing fast, and those that are growing faster. So on average, these economies, the internet economy is growing at about 33% a year. But within that, Indonesia and Vietnam have really pulled away from the pack. And Indonesia is the fastest growing economy here in Southeast Asia, with the internet economy growing at 50% per annum over the last 4 years in terms of GMV. So the vertical axis here shows the GMV growth over the last 4 years. The horizontal axis shows GDP penetration, so GMV as a percentage of GDP. And you can see that in spite of this rapid growth, Indonesia, Vietnam, and all the rest of Southeast Asia, still in terms of digital penetration, is quite low compared to countries like China and the US. What that tells you is that the runway, even from here, is very, very long. So Indonesia today is a 40 billion internet economy based on the 4 areas we talked about. That is up 5x from what it was in 2015. And we expect that to grow to over 130 billion in 2025. All sectors are growing very, very fast. But the two that have really driven this growth the most are e-commerce, which has grown 12x in 4 years, and ride-hailing, which out here includes food delivery, which has grown 6 times in 4 years. So really the pace of growth has been absolutely amazing and unprecedented. Now what has helped this growth partly is a lot of funding that has come into the economy. So you can see here that 2018, you had almost $4 billion of funding for the internet economy in Indonesia. And this year, we are on track to match or exceed that number. But I think this number is also understated because it only shows funding to companies incorporated in Indonesia. So it does not include the $5 billion that Grab raised since the beginning of 2018 to now, a large part of which has been invested back into Indonesia. So really, there's been a healthy development of a funding ecosystem here for opportunities in Indonesia, and that has helped us exceed the wildest of expectations we had. Now, a lot of the growth has come in the 7 metros in Southeast Asia. These 7 metros account for 15% of the population, 30% of the GDP, but over 50% of the GMV. And that's partly because the infrastructure was there in the metros in terms of logistics and other things to help propel this growth. And while we see metros continuing to grow over the next 5 to 6 years, the real action will be in areas outside the metros. We see cities, towns outside the metros growing at 4x, or growing by 4x between now and 2025. That will be driven by new users coming on board. It'll be driven by the fact that people in these areas don't have access to products and services that people in the cities do. So it's not just a question of convenience and value, it's a question of real access. And it will mean, actually it will transform the lives of not just millions of consumers, but also millions of small business owners who are living in these areas and can access markets that they cannot do today. So this is really going to be transformative, not just for the internet economy, but for the entire economy as a whole. Now, this time, for the first time in our report, we included a section on digital financial services, because we're seeing this too beginning to hit an inflection point. Now, why is that important? Because today, if you look in all of Southeast Asia, and the same holds true for Indonesia, only 1/4 of the people of the adult population are what we call banked. That means they have full access to a range of banking services, not just bank accounts, but access to credit, insurance, investment services, and so on. 1/4 of the population is underbanked, which means they have access to a bank account, but no access to credit or other banking services. And then half the population is unbanked, has no access to even bank account. Now, digital financial services can make it more cost efficient and can make it easier to reach a large part of those people who don't have access to those banking services. And this can be in the area of digital payments, lending, investment, insurance. Now, so far, we're beginning to see digital payments take off. So digital payments, this is all forms of cashless payments. That's cards, that's e-wallets, that's account-to-account transfers, is as much as 600 billion in 2019. So about 40% of total consumer transactions. That number is expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2025, which will account for more than half of total payments. But interestingly, you can see out here that e-wallets, which is only $22 billion today, is expected to jump about 5-fold by 2025. So this is a good first step. It obviously enables the internet economy, but also is the first step towards broadening financial services to a whole range of other people. So you can see here that the other areas like lending, investments, and insurance, the penetration is still very low at about 3%. But these are areas which are beginning to gain traction and will truly transform the lives of millions of people. Now, the landscape here in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia for digital financial service is uniquely complex. You've got a lot of players here. You've got the fintech players, you've got consumer tech platforms, so people like Tokopedia, people like Gojek, people like Traveloka, who have a vast consumer base and want to sell them financial services. You've got established consumer players, so the telecom companies and retailers who have access to consumers. And you've got the banks like BCA or DBS who also want to play in this space. So it's not clear as right now who will be the winners, but they're all competing with each other for what will be a very large pie. And for the moment, they're both competing and cooperating with each other, because that's needed to build up this ecosystem. So we're going to come up with a more detailed report showcasing the revenue potential in digital financial services at the end of October. But for the moment, let me just say that in different markets, different people have won. So for example, in China, it's the consumer tech platforms like Alibaba and Tencent who have won the digital financial services market. In places like Africa, you've had telecom companies, and you're all familiar with M-Pesa, that have really been successful here. In the US, there are companies like Square, fintech players that have made great inroads. But here in Southeast Asia, we'll have to see. I think different segments of the market will be won by different players. And there'll be more details on that in the report that we publish later this month. So moving on from that to funding. Now, one of the great things, as I talked about, is that the success of the internet economy has been driven by funding that's been available. So 2018 was a record year for funding in Southeast Asia, 14.1 billion. And despite the global headwinds, we're on track to meet that or beat that in 2019. Now, when we first published our economy report in 2016, our first edition, we had thought, 2015 was only $1 billion of funding. We thought funding would be a big issue and said that to hit 200 billion by 2025, we need to have $40 to $50 billion of funding over 10 years. We're going to hit that number of $40 to $50 billion in less than half that period. So it's not surprising that the economy has grown much faster than we thought, and we've had to up our estimates. E-commerce and ride-hailing have raised 2/3 of the money that's been raised in Southeast Asia. But beyond that, you can see fintech is also growing. Now, the number here shows 1.2 billion in 2018. We probably will match or exceed that in 2019. But that understates the amount that's gone into fintech. This does not include investments like being made by banks like BCA or DBS into financial services, digital financial services. It doesn't include money that's been raised by companies like Tokopedia, Grab, Gojek to invest in OVO and GoPay. So if you take all that into account, fintech is really exploding. And that's why we think the opportunity in digital financial services has hit an inflection point. Again, 2/3 of the amount has been invested in 11 unicorns in Southeast Asia. They've taken bulk of the funding. Now you can see out here, 11 unicorns, that's 11 companies with market value of more than 1 billion. It is really impressive. I compare that with Latin America, which has less than 10 unicorns, and that's an economic bloc far bigger than Southeast Asia. When you look at these names, 5 out of these 11 unicorns, or about half, are headquartered in Indonesia. By the way, when we issued our first report in 2016, that number was 0. So Indonesia has really taken off, and even the other 5 that are based in Singapore also have significant amount of their investment going into Indonesia. And there's one from Vietnam. But while the unicorns have got a lot of attention, there are also 70 companies valued between $100 million and $1 billion, what we call the aspiring unicorns. And about $5 billion of funding has gone to these companies. These companies are particularly interesting because they now have established business models and are really willing to break out, ready to break out. And I wouldn't be surprised, some of these are very, very close to being unicorns. And as Paruri said, I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of them are on the list of unicorns next year. But what to me is the most interesting is the fact that in the last few years, we've really built a startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia. $7 billion has been invested in nearly 3,000 startups. You know, when we initially started this economy report in 2016, there was a lot of money available for seed companies and Series A companies. But then you hit the valley of death. There was no funding available after that. That has dramatically changed now. A lot of money available for these startups from seed, Series A, Series B. And in fact, if anything, the gap now is in Series C and D, where people want to raise between 25 million to 100 million. But again, that is being rapidly addressed because you have larger players, the large private equity players, coming down and wanting to invest $50 to $100 million. And the smaller VCs who couldn't write these large checks, like EV, are setting up growth funds like EV Growth to address this market. So overall, I would say funding is now really not much of a challenge. We've really addressed that thing. And we've hit an economy which is $100 billion, so very large. Indonesia and Vietnam have truly moved away from the pack in terms of growth. The next growth opportunity is beyond the metros. Digital financial services ready to take off. And as I said, funding is healthy and will support the development of this ecosystem. Before I wrap up, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about Temasek and our investment approach. You know, we're very focused on Southeast Asia internet economy and looking to sort of see what we can do here. And we've stepped up activity in the last 12 months particularly. But I would say as a shareholder, what makes us different is that we are long-term and patient. We invest out of our own balance sheets, so we don't have a fund life. And the companies we've invested in were for 10 years and 20 years. We have flexible capital, which means we can invest in startups, in mid-stage companies, later-stage companies. We have domain experts who focus globally in our chosen areas of focus. We are collaborative and non-intrusive. What I mean by that is we're not here to tell companies how to manage their business. We like backing the best entrepreneurs, the best management teams, and leave it to the boards to run the companies and be supportive wherever it's necessary. And we are supportive particularly during challenging times. During the global financial crisis, many of our companies did rights issues, and we wrote 100% of those rights issues. We didn't need to put in more than our pro rata share, but that was because our willingness to underwrite 100% of the rights issues made other shareholders come in. So that's where we've supported our companies during really times of trouble. And I think the main role we see of us ourselves is that of an ecosystem integrator. We have invested in over 500 companies across the globe. We have a number of platforms, including early stage investing platforms like Vertex, Pavilion Capital, Heliconia. We have a venture debt fund, Innoven Capital. And in the outer ring, we have a series of investment partners like eVentures and others across the globe. And we bring all this to bear to the benefit of our investment companies. So I wanted this short advertisement of Temasek because we're really committed to Southeast Asia. We're really committed to all of you in this room who are looking to develop the internet economy. And we hope to have the opportunity to work with many of you out here. Thank you. Sorry, I've talked a lot about numbers, but really the most important thing about all this is how it's changing the lives of millions of people here in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia. So just to display that, we have a short video which we want to show you, which really tells you the power of the internet economy.
Sedih banget karena waktu orang tua aku bangkrut, aku hampir berhenti sekolah. Aku harus fight untuk diri sendiri sih biar aku bisa lulus dan bisa punya masa depan. Dan akhirnya sampai di sini, kan sedih. Nama saya Yolanda, umur saya 24 tahun, saya pendiri dari Saladnyo dari Indonesia. Dengan adanya internet, Saladnyo sangat berkembang pesat karena dalam waktu 1 tahun, dari sebuah kos-kosan, Saladnyo sekarang sudah mempunyai 20 store di 4 kota. Dari tidak punya karyawan sama sekali, sekarang Saladnyo sudah bisa mempunyai karyawan sebanyak 130. Kalau jualan online itu dari aku mulai SMA sih. Waktu aku SMA itu karena banyak masalah keluarga yang bikin ekonomi kita susah, berhasil lulusin aku sampai aku lulus SMA. Karena waktu itu aku pengen banget makan salad yang belum ada di Jogja. Jadi aku bikin salad itu lalu aku posting ke sosial media dan teman-teman banyak banget yang notice, aku mau dong, aku mau cobain. Mulai dari situ akhirnya baru kayak, oh ini bisa nih diseriusin untuk jadi bisnis. Aku mulai saladnya itu dari sebuah kos-kosan dan gak punya modal sama sekali. Lalu setelah temanku order itu, aku harus nganterin dan akhirnya aku kelelahan untuk nganterin sendiri. Aku memanfaatkan Gojek dan Grab dan sangat membantu aku untuk mengantarkan produk itu ke teman-teman aku. Kalau aku nggak pakai internet, aku yakin banget aku nggak akan sebesar sekarang. Aplikasi-aplikasi di internet itu benar-benar sangat memudahkan dari sisi aku bisa bekerja dari rumah, bisa bekerja di jalan, bahkan waktu lagi liburan pun aku bisa bekerja karena aku bisa memonitor penjualan itu seperti apa, lalu bisa menghandle anak-anak kantor pekerjaannya seperti apa. Untuk perekonomian keluarga aku sendiri sekarang udah sangat jauh dibanding dulu karena aku juga bisa buka cabang saladnya di Pontianak yang diurus oleh keluarga aku sendiri. Yang bisa sukses adalah semua orang, tergantung dari effort yang kalian keluarkan dan komitmen yang kalian berikan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sipahimalani, for your awesome speech. And now I would like to invite Mr. Wilson Cuaca to presenting the special session.
So it's really amazing to see how our digital economy has changed Indonesia lives. And we thanks to Rohit, yeah, because before Temasek reports, I mean, there is two era internally in East Ventures. The era of before Temasek's report and the era after Temasek reports. The era before Temasek reports, we are shooting in the dark. We have blind faith. We think something's going to work in Indonesia, but we have no idea. So we just invest. The moment after we invest all, and suddenly there is a report in Temasek, then we now have a benchmark. For that, actually, we create quickly the team created a new deck, what we call East Ventures meter. Okay. Yeah. So what is this East Ventures meter? Clicker? So this is what the reports say. Indonesia digital economy, online travel, online media, ride-hailing. And we think we contribute about 75% in the e-commerce. And all the people in this photo, actually in this room. When you say that the online travel hitting tens of billions, we think we are here as well. Including the ride-hailing. If I know Andre here or I invested Andre, we will have 100% immediately. Yeah. And talent. Last year report, they said that there are 100,000 talents in digital economy. And when we do our internal calculation, we have about 26,000 employed, direct hiring. This is the report about the active users, online gaming, ride-hailing, and Tokopedia alone. They are actually hitting 60% in Southeast Asia. Can you imagine how big is that? And Indonesia, Southeast Asia digital economy, we think we contribute about more than 50% of the total 40 billion Indonesia internet economy with all our portfolio companies. Unicorns, We got 3. Aspiring unicorns. This slide is not complete yet. So we add more. That's why our artists actually start crafting, the new statue. Yeah. So thank you very much, Rohit. Rohit, do you mind? I want to give you some token of appreciation.